Just a quick disclaimer that this report will talk about child sexual exploitation. If that's something that would upset you or offend you, please feel free to find another video to watch on the channel.
Earlier today, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority published the findings of its Child Sexual Exploitation Assurance Review. The review examined an investigation from 2004, which was named Operation Augusta, and established to investigate allegations of abuse against a number of children in care by older men.
Now let's start by saying how the PR department nailed this one on the head. I mean, avoiding using the words exploited by predominantly Pakistani Muslim men whilst getting a Pakistani Muslim man to give the statement.
The review also considered the actions taken by authorities in relation to Victoria Golia, an incredibly vulnerable girl who was repeatedly abused before passing away as a result of a drug overdose.
But why did she take an overdose? Was it because she wasn't believed? Was it because the police failed to act on her reports? Was it because the police were actively involved in allowing the exploitation of children? It is now commonly known that Greater Manchester Police's handling of the grooming gang epidemic was abysmal. They closed the investigation without warning and without any rationale behind it. They say they don't know who made the decision to close the investigation or even why it was closed. But all of this led to poor Victoria Agolia taking her life. So was it the drugs overdose that caused her death, or was it the police's lack of action that led to her taking the overdose that caused her death? After all, after 18 months of her telling authorities she was being repeatedly abused, raped and plied with drugs by paedophiles, she was ultimately telling people who were willing to turn a blind eye to the abuse from predominantly Pakistani Muslims who had been operating in Manchester for years and abusing possibly hundreds of young girls.
We accept that authorities fell short of doing all they could to protect and support the child victims identified in the report, and I want to apologise to all those vulnerable children who were let down.
Let's remember that the victims identified in the report were not all of the victims of this horrific act of exploitation. They were the ones who had been picked out of the many for the purposes of the report, and so many have likely not had their story told.
I can only imagine the pain and distress they must have gone through, which would have only been made worse by these failings. I am sorry they were let down, and I am sorry they were not protected from harm.
No, you're not sorry, and I'll tell you why. Because you're not speaking from the heart. You're reading a pre-prepared statement from the police force's PR department, which you can tell as he continues by the way he speaks. As I often do when I'm reading an auto cue. However, I read an auto cue for the bits that I have to get right, whereas I also give my opinions, which are not written down, but do come directly from me.
Many of the children were subject to the most profound abuse, and although the review team acknowledged there was much in Operation Augusta and the work carried out by the investigation team to be commended, we agree the overall operation was not to the standard rightfully expected from victims.
Well, that's a fucking understatement if ever I heard one. But you notice how they had to add that there was some commendable parts to Operation Augusta before they say it wasn't up to scratch. I don't think any part that could be deemed commendable should even matter when the police blatantly ignored reports of abuse, turned a blind eye to what they knew was happening in the community, and in some cases were more involved in that by allowing children to be picked up right from under their noses and failing to even interview people that they knew were abusing children.
We have made a voluntary referral to the Independent Office for Police Conduct so that they can carry out an independent assessment to determine if there are any conduct matters that should be investigated.
Not that it will make a blind bit of difference, because those at the top who should be held accountable have all left and received their pensions and will at most be added to the police barred list, which won't matter a fuck, seeing as they are already retired and living the life of Riley on a fat pension, while the victims will have to go through life living with this horrific experience every single day.
We and our partners at Manchester City Council have personally contacted all but one victim featured in the report to offer them any support that we can ahead of it being published.
Yeah, the council was involved in the cover-up too, so I'm sure it's a great relief to the victims. I mean, that's like the BBC offering a job to one of Jimmy Savile's victims. Pointless, and yet another kick in the teeth.
Each contact was carefully planned with care professionals to ensure we were as sensitive as possible, and further specialist support was offered. In early 2000s, the priorities for forces across the UK were very different. This has completely changed, and today safeguarding the vulnerable is our absolute priority.
In early 2000s, the priorities for forces across the UK were very different. How? Surely the priorities of all police forces since police forces were introduced was to deal with crimes against people and protect them from harm from others. How on earth can somebody sit there with a straight face and say that they never even did the basics of policing without being laughed off or being arrested themselves? Also, let's be fair here, safeguarding is not their priority. Protecting people from hurting words is clearly more of a priority than safeguarding anyone.
Following learnings taken from Operation Span, investigation in Rochdale and the conviction secured in 2013, we have worked closely with partners across Greater Manchester to develop a consistent standard in addressing the exploitation of young people. This approach puts the victim at the centre of everything we do, which ensures the proper support is provided by the right agencies and any safeguarding concerns are addressed.
Shouldn't that simply be the norm anyway? As I said a moment ago, the priorities of all police forces since police forces were introduced was to deal with crimes against people and protect them from harm from others. So how the fuck could an entire force balls up so badly? And let's not forget, they're not the only force to have failed in such a spectacular fashion either.
With this support from partners, it provides a stronger footing for police to prevent, disrupt and investigate these crimes. The work of these specialised teams under Operation Phoenix has been recognised nationally as showing excellent work in practice in tackling child sexual exploitation across Greater Manchester. Our work initially focused on child sexual exploitation. We have continued to learn and develop these principles with partners over the last 6 years. As a result, we have made further improvements to our whole approach to tackling the abuse and exploitation of young people.
By making sure to still demonise those who criticise the grooming gangs.
These improvements include the introduction of specialist co-located multi-agency complex safeguarding teams in every district across Greater Manchester. These focus on all aspects of exploitation, including CSE, criminal exploitation and modern slavery. GMP has been working closely alongside Manchester City Council to carry out a separate review of Operation Augusta to identify where any safeguarding measures or support needs to be put in place in the current day. A major incident team has been established under Operation Green Jacket. This dedicated multi-agency team has already carried out a significant amount of disruption actions as well as numerous safeguarding visits.
But yet no mention of any arrests.
We have been reviewing all the information available and now a full investigation has been launched. To date, this investigation has resulted in one man being arrested and another questioned under caution for the abuse of Victoria Regolia.
Ooh, one man arrested. Although that doesn't mean that they've been found guilty and punished. In fact, Operation Augusta was designed to investigate the sexual abuse of children, predominantly in care in South Manchester, with the report identifying up to 97 potential paedophiles and around 57 victims. A number of these identified males went on to commit and to be convicted of further sexual offences after the operation was discontinued just 2 years after it started.
The men have been released under investigation and we have provided an update to Victoria's grandmother on the progress of our inquiries. This remains an ongoing investigation and I would encourage anyone who was involved in the original operation as a victim, potential victim or witness to please come forward and contact us so that we and partner agencies can provide you with any support we can. We will continue to do all that we can to safeguard children within our communities. Greater Manchester Police will investigate any report of child exploitation that is made.
Even a coroner's report verdict recorded at an inquest into the death of Victoria at just 15 years old states that she died after being injected with heroin, and it significantly underplays the coercion and control that she was subjected to in terms of child sexual exploitation by these so-called men. Victoria was reported missing at least 136 times between February and September 2002, and nearly every time she was returned, she was thought to have been under the influence of alcohol and drugs. On no less than 16 occasions, residential staff became aware that Victoria was worried for her safety because of threats and incidents from inside or outside the residential unit in that same period. This was known to both police and social services. Such a horrific thing to even be hearing about in a so-called civilised society. Granted, as I've said before, white men do commit sexual offences against children, but very rarely in groups or gangs. It was just like the rise of knife crime and substance attacks. I think it's about time the police and government agencies started to question where these trends are actually coming from and do something to prevent it from the source.